in the eyes of fans. It was just the idea of him going back to the way he was in the 1990s was effectively gone. Now, the other half of this equation is that Connor Kent has basically walked away from being a superhero. And the reason why is because there came a point when he was essentially taken over by Lex Luthor, and the result was that he was basically forced to fight his teammates. And so once he had regained his mind and he had come back to his normal self, he essentially walked away. Now, the reason why this is significant is because of the fact that Connor Kent is being watched by several individuals that we can't see, who are also watching a multitude of events unfold all across the face of the earth. And because of all these different conflicts, because of all these different skirmishes, because Connor Kent does not want to be Superboy or is not going to act as Superboy, because of the fact that Batman's OMAC project has basically run amok, what this has done is it has led these individuals to believe that these people, these superheroes on Earth, are not superheroes. They're not acting the way superheroes should. And so because of that, in their mind, something needs to be corrected. Something basically needs to happen to fix this problem. Now, at this point, we switch over to the Spectre. Now, this is small, but this is something that I actually wanted to toss in here just for the sake of showing you guys how much lead up, how big the whole Infinite Crisis thing was. If you guys remember our video where we talked about Green Lantern Rebirth and the idea that Hal Jordan had basically left his role as the Spectre, or was really freed from his role as the Spectre, and went back to being Hal Jordan as we knew him, an Air Force pilot, or really a test pilot, eventually going back into the Green Lantern Corps again. What this did is it left the Spectre without a host. Now, with the Spectre not having a host, it was already on the verge of insanity and began to sort of dip over. And so because of this, the Spectre was manipulated by a being called Eclipso, which is basically like the representation of God's wrath in the DC universe. But what it did is it sent the Spectre on this absolute rampage. The reason being because the Spectre operates as the extension of God's judgment. It operates as God's judgment in the realm of DC Comics. And so because of this, Eclipso would basically approach the Spectre and said, hey, look, everything exists according to like the rules, according to like the law of God. Magic violates that law because it allows people to operate outside of God's control. And because of that, these individuals are basically breaking God's law. The Spectre responded by killing the wizard Shazam, the being that basically gives Billy Batson his powers. And because of this, Billy Batson more or less crash lands on Earth, stating to everybody, Shazam's been completely obliterated. Shazam is now dead. Now again, the reason why a lot of this stuff is done is because of the fact that this serves the purpose of allowing DC to go forward after Infinite Crisis, treating it as a soft reboot in the sense that not everybody gets rebooted, their histories aren't completely rewritten, but it basically kind of allows DC to halfway hit the reset switch and kind of, offer some new information or basically change people's histories a little bit, especially with the return of the multiverse. And so switching back over to the Justice League Watchtower, again, this is pretty small. It's not the most important thing in the world, but it's basically just the arrival of Mongol. Now again, this is Mongol's son. And so because of this, Mongol's more or less just kind of relishing in the idea that the Justice League has been defeated more or less, that they have no trust in one another. Because remember, Mongol's one of the most formidable foes of the Justice League in general, and alongside Cyborg Superman had eradicated Coast City, which set Hal Jordan on the path of declaring himself as Parallax and becoming a bad guy during the events of 0 Hour Crisis in Time. And so because of this, again, it's really just kind of a reminder of how dark things are, simply due to the fact that in the midst of this conflict, Wonder Woman goes to kill Mongol. Now, one of the things you may notice here is that this comic, this story, as it starts, is very dark. It's a very, very dark story. It's designed to be that way. Geoff Johns wrote this explicitly. And the reason why is because of the fact that it's no secret Geoff Johns harkens for an age when comic books were a lot more lighthearted, especially with what we're seeing right now with like the Superman comics and DC Rebirth. Geoff Johns is really more of a fan of like the Silver Age of comics, the 1950s, 1960s, going into the 1970s when the Bronze Age started. The idea for Geoff Johns was to basically say there was a time when superheroes were very lighthearted, when superhero stories were fun, when they were upbeat, when they lifted you up instead of making you feel like you've been pulled down. And what Geoff Johns is basically doing with this, by virtue of talking through Superboy Prime, Earth 2 Superman, so on and so forth, is he's basically saying because of the fact that comics have become a little more realistic, because of the fact that comics are a little more visceral and a little more real, the magic has essentially been lost. There is no, wow, Superman is someone to look up to. Now it's Superman is dark, Wonder Woman's dark, Batman's dark. What we need is a return to greatness. And so it's almost like you can really go back and look at the history of Geoff Johns' various works in DC Comics. And I'm not going to run them all off because there's so many of them. You can look at the Flash, you can look at, Green Lantern, you can look at the New 52 Justice League. You can trace all of these things that Geoff Johns has done all the way up to the start of DC Rebirth and basically see the point he's making and see his efforts to return DC Comics to more of a uplifting place as opposed to one that's a little too real and a little too visceral. And so in response to everything that's gone on, what we basically have are these hidden individuals saying, enough is enough. This is it. This is done. We need to do something. We have to step in. And this is when we learn that this is Earth 2 Superman, Superboy Prime, Alexander Luthor, and Lois Lane. So this is actually a really, really cool development, because when this first happened, it was like, what? It was like, oh my God, it was one of the coolest things ever to take place in this particular story. And so because of this, what this does is this allows us to segue for a second to a story called Villains United. Now again, Villains United was a 6-issue miniseries that was a lead up, or at least part of the lead up to Infinite Crisis. But like a lot of the lead ups, it wasn't necessarily the story itself was intrinsic. It was what came out of the story that was important. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of skipped over it. I mean, if there was something in the story that was significant, that was wildly important, then I would say, okay, we'll go through the whole thing. But we can really just kind of point to the story itself and highlight the finer points, as opposed to run through the entire thing. Now, with regards to this, with regards to Villains United, what this was basically Lex Luthor reforming the Secret Six. Now, I mean, there was like the secret society of supervillains and so on and so forth, but the Secret Six was more of like an inner circle of that particular organization. But it was Lex Luthor leading the group and basically bringing all these villains together for the purpose of attacking the superheroes. And so what was going on in the lead up to Infinite Crisis is you had the OMAC project, these robots running around trying to annihilate heroes and villains. And then you had the Secret Six trying to annihilate superheroes. And so because of this, in the middle of this fight, we end up having Power Girl, who's basically met by the arrival of Earth 2 Superman. Now, harkening back to the beginning of this video when we talked about like Earth 2 and we talked about the multiverse and so on and so forth, Power Girl was a character who was introduced before Crisis on Infinite Earths. Her character is a direct reflection of the various struggles DC's faced with regards to continuity issues following Crisis on Infinite Earths. Because of the fact that she was the cousin of Superman from Earth 2, when Crisis on Infinite Earths happened, what DC did is they went forward and treated things like the multiverse never existed. Well, if the multiverse never existed according to DC, but Power Girl was still present after Crisis on Infinite Earths, then where did she come from? Because Superman is supposed to be the only survivor of Krypton. There is no Supergirl, none of that stuff. And so the question is, who is she? Where does she come from? DC tried to go back and re-explain her origins, but it was an absolute mess. It was an absolute nightmare. And so what Geoff Johns is doing here is he's basically saying all the nonsense with origin stories and all that jargon and all that garbage that came after Crisis on Infinite Earths is being removed in its entirety. What he does by having Earth 2 Superman meet Power Girl is basically take her over to, this base of operations where Superboy Prime and Alexander Luthor, where they're all operating out of, and Earth 2 Superman basically recounts the entirety of Crisis on Infinite Earths for Power Girl. Now, because of the fact that this information is given to her in conjunction with physically touching, these individuals, what ends up happening is her entire history is restored to her. And so she basically remembers all of her history, after Crisis on Infinite Earths. And so it's basically Geoff Johns, again, essentially saying the origin of Power Girl before Crisis on Infinite Earths is now her origin story. That's now the basis behind her character. Now, the other half of this is that it's also her basically realizing she's re-encountering a long-lost cousin, the person that she knew, the person that she trusted, the person who effectively adopted her and in a lot of ways treated her like a daughter. And so because of this is a very celebratory moment between the two of them. But in the midst of all this, we actually switch back over to Batman himself. Now, again, this deals a lot with regards to, all these different, the OMAC project and so on and so forth. But it's Batman trying to keep things back under control, Batman trying to basically corral things back unto himself. And the reason why is because of the fact that Batman is nothing if not a man who believes that he can take on the world and keep it under control. That's one of the reasons why we like his character so much, is because he is basically the epitome of a control freak. But the way it works itself out is that in this instance with Brother Eye and the OMAC project, Batman can't stop it. Batman can't do it on his own. Instead, he's going to have to turn to other people. He's going to have to turn to other superheroes, individuals who can help him out. And so what ends up happening here is we transition back over to Earth 2 Superman, and this is when we learn the real motivation for why they're here. With Earth 2 Superman, Superboy Prime, Alexander Luthor, all these guys looking at the superhero landscape, while they were in the Paradise Dimension, what they've done is they've come to the realization that these superheroes are not superheroes. And so the idea is to basically eliminate the entirety of everybody on this Earth, eradicate it completely, bring Earth 2 back, and then resurrect these individuals as their Earth 2 counterparts. So essentially saying, we're going to get rid of you as you exist now, and we're going to bring you back as better and happier people. Now, the crazy thing about this is that Power Girl has loyalty issues at this point, and we'll actually see what those loyalty issues are. But for the moment, we can kind of get away with simply saying that she's basically stuck between the superheroes that she's fought alongside so much, the loyalty she has to them, but in addition to that, the loyalty she has to Earth 2 Superman and her desire to see things go back to being, a better time, to see superheroes becoming better people. And so what what ends up happening here is that with Batman basically struggling with the idea that Brother Eye is the most colossal failure that he's had, in the sense of the program that he designed completely ran amok. With Batman, harkening back to the death of Jason Todd, with Batman looking at the death of his parents, what he sees is failure after failure after failure. And the interesting thing about this, the way Geoff Johns writes this, is that he's actually not wrong. When it comes to the character of Bruce Wayne, when it comes to the character of Batman, he's had a lot of successes. Dick Grayson was a great success. Barbara Gordon being shot, Batman feels like that's a failure on his behalf. The Joker's various schemes, all the people who have died because of the fact that he simply just didn't kill all his villains outright, Batman considers those to be failures. The death of Jason Todd, Batman's failure. Again and again and again, when Batman could have stepped in and done the right thing, he always did the wrong thing in his mind. And so because of this, he's on the verge of basically giving up. And in fact, he goes as far as to say, I wish I could start over. And almost like a genie popping out of a bottle, Earth 2 Superman arrives on the scene and basically says, I can help you with that. Now, the funny thing about this is that Batman's like, you're not the Superman that I know. And Superman's like, I know, I'm Superman essentially from Earth 2. And so again, these two basically end up having a conversation with one another. And the conversation goes as far as Earth 2 Superman basically saying, here's what we're gonna do. I mean, I come from a totally different place. I come from a universe called Earth 2. The universe has long since been gone, but I want to bring it back. On my universe, on my Earth, in Earth 2, superheroes were something to aspire to. Superheroes were something to celebrate. Superheroes weren't feared by society. Superheroes didn't consider themselves to be failures. They made mistakes, but in the end, they always ended up doing the right thing. There was no moral ambiguity. There was no, well, maybe he's a good guy, maybe he's a bad guy. There were no anti-heroes. There was right, there was wrong, and if you weren't right, you were wrong. And that's the coolest thing about this, is because it's very rigid, it's very structured, but in a lot of ways, it's also Geoff Johns kind of pointing at his own desires and essentially saying that, yes, I love the Silver Age of comics, but it may not necessarily be, exactly as I remember it. So again, there's a lot of nostalgia feel going on in this particular bit, nostalgia feels, going on in this little particular bit of a story. But what ends up happening here is what we do is we basically have, Lex Luthor meeting Lex Luthor. Now, this seems to come out of left field, but the reason why this is the case is because of the fact that during the Villains United story, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to just sort of hold this off, during the Villains United story, Lex Luthor, as he had basically reformed the Secret Six, was not Lex Luthor. This was actually Alexander Luthor. And one of the things that we end up finding out here is that over the course of the time in which they were watching the various superheroes from the Paradise Dimension, Alexander Luthor and Superboy Prime were leaving the Paradise Dimension, and they were showing up inside the superhero landscape in DC Comics, and they were basically setting the stage to give them justification to go to Earth 2 Superman and say, look how bad they are, look how much they're failing, those aren't superheroes, we need to fix this. And so because of that, what ends up happening here is that with, Alexander Luthor confronting Lex Luthor, Alexander Luthor immediately overpowers him and essentially removes him from the equation. Now, what Geoff Johns does is he starts to show us how these guys are not necessarily, Earth 2 Superman and so on and so forth, how they're not necessarily the great and magical superheroes that we remember. And this is why I say Geoff Johns is kind of pointing at his own case of nostalgia. He's kind of pointing at his own case and saying, just because we remember things a certain way doesn't mean they are that way. And so with Earth 2 Superman basically approaching Bruce Wayne, he's like, look man, change is coming. Either this change can be easy or this change can be painful, but change is coming. It's better to be on the devil's right hand than in his path. And so because of this, Superman, Earth 2 Superman basically says, look, this is gonna happen. We're going to eliminate you and we're gonna replace you with something better. Make it easier on yourself. Now, of course, Batman's response is to use kryptonite, and this is when Geoff Johns steps in and basically sets the stage for how Superboy Prime is going to wreck the world. What ends up happening here is Earth 2 Superman tells Batman, that's kryptonite that Earth 1 Superman gave you, but it doesn't work on me because it's not the kryptonite from my universe. So this is really interesting. This is really cool. For those of you guys who are following Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, this basically works in the exact same fashion as the Infinity Gauntlet. The Infinity Gauntlet can only be used in the universe that the Infinity Stones come from. Kryptonite can only work on, the same universe as a Superman that it comes from. So Earth 1 Kryptonite works on Earth 1 Superman. Earth 2 Kryptonite works on Earth 2 Superman. Earth 1 Kryptonite will not work on Earth 2 Superman. Now, the reason why this is important is because as we saw in our video on the origin of Superboy Prime, Krypton was obliterated in its entirety. Kryptonite are basically just radioactive shards of Krypton. Because of the fact that Krypton from Earth Prime was totally disintegrated by the sun, there is no green Kryptonite from Earth Prime. And so there is no weakness for Superboy Prime. And that's why I say things are kind of crazy when it comes to this, or at least there's no weakness initially. Now, of course, Alexander Luthor making his presence known to Lex Luthor Luthor really just serves the purpose of allowing him to topple Lex Luthor. I mean, that's really all there is to it. But at this point, what ends up happening is we basically have Power Girl, after she's going through her own bit of struggle, trying to figure out what direction she was going to go in, whose side she was going to choose. What she did is she came to a middle ground and said, what we can do is we can't just show up on the doorstep of all the superheroes that exist right now and say, we're going to eradicate you and replace you with something better. What she says is, we have to work out a compromise. There's no reason why these two universes can't exist at the same time. So again, this is Geoff Johns setting up the return of the multiverse. But what ends up happening here is when she returns back to the headquarters of everyone, she basically ends up discovering that all these different individuals, Martian Manhunter when he was taken, Black Adam when he was kidnapped, all of them have been attached to this massive pillar, this huge obelisk that seems to have been constructed out of the remains of the Anti-Monitor. Now again, what Geoff Johns is doing here is Geoff Johns is basically saying, look, the Anti-Monitor is still a thing that existed. Crisis on Infinite Earths happened. The Anti-Monitor is a concept. It's not something that I'm basically wiping out in its entirety, but this is about the extent that we get with the Anti-Monitor himself. In terms of the Anti-Monitor actually coming back as we know him, that'll be done as part of Geoff Johns' Sinestro Corps work, but it'll actually come out of the reformation of the multiverse from Infinite Crisis. But what we end up doing here is we end up finding out that with Alexander Luthor and Superboy Prime being the true individuals behind the destruction, or I guess really, all this damage and all these evil deeds, of course, what's basically happened is they have effectively become bad guys. Now, what this does is it begs the question, are they really bad guys or are they good guys? The funny thing about this is that their actions are given to us by virtue of what we see around them. We see them kidnapping heroes. We see them, hooking them up to giant obelisks. We see them with the intention of bringing the multiverse back, but wiping out all the different heroes and so on and so forth. But it also, it's like this, like a hypothetical scenario. If I came to you and I brought you over to the side of a lake and I said, in 5 minutes, this guy who's fishing right now is going to be killed by a man who comes up behind him and slits his throat. 5 minutes later, exactly what I predicted would happen. Somebody comes up behind the fisherman, slices his throat, and that's the end of him. Now, on the surface, it's, well, that guy killed a fisherman, he's an evil man. But what if I told you the reason why he slit that fisherman's throat is because that murderer is trying to feed his family and he's doing it the only way he knows how, because he doesn't know how to fish. Sure, the question could be asked, why didn't he ask the fisherman to teach him how to fish? But he was thinking in the moment, he was doing what he thought was right. And that's why I say things are kind of interesting. But then it also brings into play the idea of results. It brings into play the idea of motivation. Sure, what they want to do is the right thing, but how they go about it is important too. And if what they do is basically start kidnapping all these different superheroes with the intention of channeling their power into a single pillar, which in turn will restore the multiverse, then are they really good guys? And so again, with Power Girl basically learning about all this is when Alexander Luthor essentially says, take her out. If you're not with us, you're against us. And so at this point, Power Girl is basically an enemy. But what we also end up finding here is, again, we basically end up learning that Lois Lane, one of the motivations behind the Earth 2 Superman is that Lois Lane is essentially dying. Earth 2 Lois Lane is basically dying. And so Earth 2 Superman was in a vulnerable state. Alexander Luthor began to prey on that. And what Alexander Luthor said, was basically kind of whispering, evil deeds, on the shoulders of Superman, and essentially saying, hey, look, man, if we can bring back Earth 2, Lois Lane will live. We'll keep her alive. Now, all this did was feed Alexander Luthor's purpose of trying to basically restore the multiverse and create a perfect Earth. The issue with this is that with Superboy Prime standing alongside Alexander Luthor, Superboy Prime's motivation is much, much simpler. Superboy Prime isn't looking for some grandiose thing. He's not looking to take over all things in existence, at least not right now. Superboy Prime's motivation is that he hates Connor Kent. And the reason why is because of the fact that Connor Kent carries the mantle of Superboy, but Connor Kent is not being Superboy. Superboy Prime basically looks at everything that's happened and says, we sacrificed our existence. We sacrificed our lives in order to create a better world for all these superheroes to live in. And all they're doing is squandering it. All they're doing is refusing to be superheroes. All they're doing is fighting among one another. All they're doing is screwing everything up. And so in Superboy's, Superboy Prime's mind, Connor Kent is not Superboy. And if he's not going to act like Superboy, he doesn't deserve to live as Superboy. And so again, Superboy Prime's whole motivation is just personal. I mean, it's basic and it's personal. But the cool thing about it is we get to see him destroy everyone. And so again, what ends up happening here is that with Lois Lane, Earth 2 Lois Lane, continuing to succumb to her various, her illness, what ends up happening is, of course, Earth 2 Superman arrives on the scene. Alexander Luthor says, hey, look, man, just chill here. Chill here, hang out with her, everything will be fine. The other half of this is that with Power Girl having been subdued, the dog is let off his leash. Superboy Prime says, look, let me go find Connor Kent. Let me deal with Connor Kent. Alexander Luthor says, okay. Now, up until this point, it's been standard Comics Explained. Ladies and gentlemen of the Rob Corps, things are about to pop off. All right, so the cool thing here, God, I've been waiting for this. I had to explain everything in order to make it make sense. I've been waiting for this moment right now. Superboy Prime rolls up on Connor Kent's home. And the crazy thing about this is Connor Kent doesn't know who he is. Superboy Prime's, when Connor Kent's like, who are you? Superboy Prime's response is, I'm the Superboy the world needs. I'm the Superboy the world deserves. You are not Superboy. Now, of course, the funniest thing about this is Connor Kent tries to hold his own, right? Like Connor Kent's just like, man, I don't know who this guy is, but I'm gonna take him out. Connor Kent starts punching back, so on and so forth. Superboy Prime's response is, man, you better come strong. Dude, he wrecks Connor Kent, absolutely crushes him. And that's the craziest thing about this is because it's just Superboy Prime in unbridled rage. It's just the wrath of Superboy Prime. That's all this is. Now, of course, with the fact that Connor Kent's been damaged and the fact that he's engaged in this massive conflict and he's essentially losing, he sends out an SOS to the Titans. Now, the funny thing about this is like Cassie Sandsmark, like Wonder Girl, all right? Cassie Sandsmark shows up. Hey guys, I brought the Titans and the Teen Titans and the JSA. Let's get them. Superboy Prime's like, I don't give a damn. Dude, Superboy Prime wrecks them all. Dude, that's the coolest thing about this. He's ripping off arms, he's ripping off legs. He's like, come feel it. It's the coolest thing that I've ever seen. And that's why I love this so much, is because it is Superboy Prime losing his mind. And that's why so many people love his character. But the other half of this is Geoff Johns writes him so well. I mean, yeah, it's Superboy Prime vengeful, it's Superboy Prime lashing out, it's Superboy Prime wrecking everyone. But what he's doing the entire time is he's saying, you're ruining me. You're making me like you. You're making me evil. You're making me bad. You're making me a corrupted person. And the crazy thing is that all these heroes are just fighting off against him as best they can. And it is absolutely amazing because what it does is it gives Superboy Prime character. It gives him so much development. It's tough. It's prime time. It gives Superboy Prime so much development because what he does is he doesn't see himself for what he is. He doesn't see himself for what he's doing. He's a guy that's fighting the entirety of the Teen Titans, fighting the entirety of the Titans, fighting half of the Justice Society of America because in his mind, they don't deserve to be heroes. Well, who's Superboy Prime to make that declaration? Who's Superboy Prime to decide who's a hero and who's not a hero? Superboy Prime is kind of like a reflection of a lot of comic book fans who say things need to go back the way they were because the way they are now is bad. I mean, bad according to you, but not bad according to everyone. And so because of that, Superboy Prime has a lot of build here. And that's what makes it so cool is because this entire fight happens over the span of, 5 or 6 pages. But the way that it's done is so cool. And that's why I think Geoff Johns, he's an amazing writer just because of the fact that he's so good at building characters, even if it's only in a very short amount of time. But because of the fact that Superboy Prime is basically this guy that no one seems to be able to take out, because of the fact that Superboy Prime is just crushing person after person after person, knocking them down like dominoes, what ends up happening here, and this is man, fanboy. One of the coolest things here is that Jay Garrick, Wally West, and Bart Allen try to race him into the Speed Force. Now, this is crazy because you got to think, there are all kinds of beings that Superboy Prime has fought. And of course, that's one of the reasons why Geoff Johns really seemed to choose him was because of the fact that basically Superboy Prime is Silver Age Superman. It's 1950s Superman. The Superman who is pulling a chain of planets out of a dying solar system. It's the Superman who sneezed and destroyed a solar system. It's that version of Superman. Initially, Superboy Prime had no weaknesses when he was first introduced into DC Comics. None. He wasn't weak to red sun, to red solar radiation. Kryptonite didn't exist. He wasn't weak to magic. He had no weaknesses whatsoever. And Geoff Johns plays on this. He says, look, he's faster than every version of Superman. He's stronger than every version of Superman. He's more capable than all the other superheroes that he's fighting against. He's literally a one-man army. Who's going to be able to stop him? Well, with Bart Allen, Wally West, and Jay Garrick trying to race him into the Speed Force, by God, it takes everything they have to try to push him in. But this is when Geoff Johns sets the stage for the return of Barry Allen. And the reason why is because try as they might, and as difficult as it may be, they can't do it on their own. So what happens? Barry Allen reaches out from the Speed Force and pulls Superboy Prime in. And that's what's so cool, is because keep in mind, Barry Allen, after the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths, popped up from time to time. I mean, DC basically said, said, he's still around, but we didn't know what they were going to do with him. We didn't know if he was ever going to come back. We didn't know if he was going to be gone forever. We had no idea what was going to happen. Barry Allen reaching out from the Speed Force and yanking him in is amazing, because basically everybody's able to pull Superboy Prime in there, and that essentially seems to be the end of him. And so what ends up happening here is, with Alexander Luthor having completed this massive pillar, channeling all these energies back into himself and basically using it to reform the multiverse, what he does is he basically restores Earth 2. And so what we get is Earth 1, New Earth, and Earth 2, laying the foundation for the return of the multiverse in DC Comics. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Next week, we will pick up with the second half of Infinite Crisis, because I know some of you guys are just like, wait a minute. There's more to Infinite Crisis than that, man. There's more to Infinite Crisis than that. There is. There's a lot more to Infinite Crisis than that. The problem is, it's like 7 or 8 double-sized issues. I think it's 7 double-sized issues. It's too much to just do in one video. So because of that, we're going to pick up the second half of this next week. But if you guys are new here to Let's Explain, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like. If you guys want to see what happens when Superboy Prime comes out of the Speed Force and then wrecks the Green Lantern Corps, leave a comment down below, because that is in the second half of Infinite Crisis, and it's amazing. And I will catch you guys later. Peace. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so picking up with the second half of Infinite Crisis, I really think that this second half is a lot easier to digest than the first. I know with the first half, I threw a lot at you guys, just because Jeff Johns, the way he writes his stories usually when it comes to these big crossover events, is the first part is here's all the stuff you need to know, and the second part is and we're on to the action, and you get a good blend. It's just, Jeff Johns was using Infinite Crisis as a way to wrap up a lot of different things, to remove a lot of different things from the DC landscape. Now, some of this was editorial. For example, when we get to the segment about Dick Grayson, we'll actually find out that editorial had a different intention than what we saw in the story itself. But there were a lot of things that ended up happening behind the scenes that influenced how this story was done, because DC was looking to Infinite Crisis to change things up. Now, I think this makes a really good talking point, because at the end of the last video, we talked about how the multiverse had returned. And the idea here is that with Crisis on Infinite Earths, it was a line-wide reboot. I mean, it was a hard reboot. Everything was just reset from one. With Infinite Crisis, it's not that way. Jeff Johns really just kind of comes along and says, well, you get to stay and you get to stay, you got to go, but you get to stay and you get to stay. It's really just kind of going through and basically just revitalizing characters and returning them to their roots. And this is never more so evident than when we pick up with the return of the multiverse and the restoration of Earth 2. Now remember, Earth 2 is basically the universe where all the Golden Age heroes existed. So basically all the superheroes, if you do Google searches or you look them up or anything, all the superheroes that were first created in the 1930s, the 1940s, and the really early part, the first 5 years of the 1950s, that was all Golden Age stuff. When the multiverse is recreated by Alexander Luthor, suddenly people like Jay Garrick just begin vanishing all over the place, and no one knows where they are. Of course, Earth 2 Superman, Earth 2 Lois Lane, they vanish as well. What we find out is that they've been sent to Earth 2. And so really what's happening here is Jeff Johns is basically saying, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, a lot of the characters who were introduced before Crisis on Infinite Earths in the multiverse on a different Earth, they were just kind of rolled over into the main DC continuity in the New Earth continuity after Crisis on Infinite Earths. But because the multiverse is back, basically all these different heroes are going to the Earths where they first appeared at. So for example, we have members of the Shazam family that show up on Earth S, and the reason why is because before Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Shazam family existed on Earth S. And so that's basically what's happening here. It's just returning all these different characters back to where it was that they came from. Now, a huge majority, a bulk of these characters, characters like Batsman. I know I said Batsman in the other video. video, characters like Batsman, he stays simply because of the fact that he's just a character that's so popular that his Earth 2 counterpart's not going to be found. I mean, you're only going to see him on Earth 1. He's one of these weird exceptions. Switching back over to Batman himself, the idea is that with Brother Eye having had all these different OMACs and, kind of running amok and so on, Batman's main focus is to basically take out take out Brother Eye, eliminate Brother Eye from the equation, and then the OMACs will fall respectively. Because remember, the OMACs only exist because of the connection between Brother Eye and the OMACs. As soon as Brother Eye is destroyed, these, these nanobots, whatever it is that surround these normal humans, will basically deactivate, and these humans will go back to the way they were before. Now, in truth, this was just DC giving themselves an out, right? It was just a way of saying, hey, look, Brother Eye is going to be defeated, and it's not going to cost the lives of some, 2 million people in order to do it. They're all just going to go back to the way they were before. But the other half of this is we actually have Booster Gold bringing to Batman Jamie Reyes. Now, I call him Jamie Reyes. Some people like Joe call him Jaime Reyes. I think it really just kind of depends. I'm used to pronouncing it Jamie Reyes. I mean, that's I don't know why it would be pronounced a different way. But Jamie Reyes is basically the new Blue Beetle. Keep in mind, in Countdown to Infinite Crisis, we talked about how Ted Kord, the Blue Beetle at the time, was killed by Maxwell Lord. But the funny thing about this is that when it came to the Blue Beetle landscape, with the exception of Ted Kord, everybody has powers because of a scarab that they possess. Now, originally in DC Comics, the Blue Beetle was a man named Dan Garrett. Dan Garrett's history is a little fuzzy. If you go to like Fox Feature Syndicate, or you were to look up Fox Feature Syndicate, what you would find out is that Blue Beetle at that point in time was more akin to like a detective or something along the lines of like, Green Hornet, something similar to that, as opposed to the Blue Beetle that you most commonly think of. But the idea here is that when Blue Beetle Dan Garrett was effectively taken over by DC as a whole, his entire history and origin was revamped to a degree to where it was similar, but he actually had powers that were derived from a scarab. And the scarab effectively went away when Ted Kord became the new Beetle. And the reason why is because of the fact that DC was looking for a more grounded character. So the Blue Beetle scarab simply just existed as like a trophy in the room, or really in the base of operations for Ted Kord. And Ted Kord himself had no actual powers. He was just a super smart guy. But what ended up happening is because of the fact that Infinite Crisis was designed to fulfill Jeff Johns' desire to take a lot of comics, or as many as he could, in terms of characters, and send them back to their roots, when we eventually saw Ted Kord stumble across the wizard Shazam and his efforts to figure out, what was going on with Maxwell Lord, Ted Kord was killed. The Blue Beetle scarab was left on Shazam. When the Rock of Eternity was destroyed by the Spectre, the Beetle scarab landed on Earth and then took possession of Jamie Reyes. And so what that meant is that Jamie Reyes went forward as the new Blue Beetle with powers. Now, the caveat to all this is that within this story, Infinite Crisis, and even going into like 52 and going into a lot of stories that focus on his character, the issue is that Jamie Reyes does not have any control of the Blue Beetle scarab. It operates with a will of its own. It's more instinctive or reactive than anything else. And so because of this is basically introducing his character into DC and showing us, or at least giving us an idea of what to expect. Now, of course, Booster Gold bringing in Jamie Reyes to Batman is done because of the fact that, remember, Booster Gold's a time traveler, and in his future, he already knows about the events that are going on right now. And what he tells Batman is, you're going to try to find Brother Eye. You're not going to be able to find it, but the Blue Beetle scarab can help you locate it because of the fact that it can allow its user to almost do anything they need to at any particular point in time. It's almost like the last white event with, Starbrand. For those of you guys who were familiar with with Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. But the fact remains here that basically what Booster Gold says is Blue Beetle will help you find Brother Eye because you will not be able to locate it on your own. And so at this point, what we do is we switch back over to Earth 2. Now, with regards to Earth 2, we focus largely on Superman. And the idea was, remember, he was told by Alexander Luthor, if we restore the multiverse, then Lois Lane and you guys can go back to Earth 2 and Lois Lane will live. Simply because of the fact that she was dying for reasons that we couldn't necessarily, weren't really explained. It was just kind of like the idea of old age or something along those lines. But despite being on Earth 2, Lois Lane dies anyway. Now, this is one of the most touching moments of the story. And the reason why is because of the fact that it is an absolute law of the universe that Superman always rescues Lois Lane. Superman could be in a village of children who are being bombarded by conventional warfare, and he will leave to save Lois Lane. But the idea here is this is Golden Age Superman. This is 1930s, 1940s, incorruptible Superman. Back in those days, he always saved Lois Lane. That was the crux of the story. Will Superman get to Lois Lane in time? Find out in the next issue. That was the way those stories were written back then. And so with Lois Lane dying, this is an experience that Earth 2 Superman has never felt before. There's never been an instance where he's ever had to even question whether or not Lois Lane was going to survive. He was always there. But with her death, with the scream that he lets out, the fact that he's feeling this much suffering and this much pain, it breaks the barrier between Earth 1 and Earth 2. And Superman on Earth 1 hears hears it. And that's how much suffering goes into the shout. That's how much suffering goes into the scream. Now, again, this is Geoff Johns kind of tying up all these loose ends and having, really going forward with the intention of returning superheroes back to the way they're supposed to be. Now, we'll find out with Final Crisis, a lot of that ends up getting changed by Grant Morrison, but what ends up happening here is we transition over to Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman of Earth 1 is actually visited by Wonder Woman of Earth 2, the Golden Age Wonder Woman. And the cool thing about this is that the Golden Age Wonder Woman takes Earth 1 Wonder Woman, Diana, on this journey where she basically explains, look, you're not a hero right now. You're not acting like a hero. You don't need to prove yourself to anybody. Like, you've been a leader, you've been a queen, you have been an ambassador, you've done virtually everything. The only thing you need to be right now is human. And that's the coolest thing about this, because what Geoff Johns is basically saying is that in a lot of ways, the modern superheroes at the time this story was written, 2005, 2006, the superheroes had lost their humanity. They weren't superheroes anymore. It was almost like you could write this story as a precursor to Injustice Gods Among Us, right? Like, they lose their humanity. They lose what it is that makes them heroes. And because of this, they basically fight amongst each other. I mean, in the Injustice universe, they fight amongst each other, so on and so forth. In this story, it's a lot of the same way. They've lost their humanity. And in sight of losing their humanity, they fail to take into account that the actions that they engage in, especially Wonder Woman when she killed Maxwell Lord, have an impact that resonates beyond herself. Humanity won't say, well, oh my God, Wonder Woman killed Maxwell Lord. Wonder Woman is a terrible person. No. What humanity will say is, Wonder Woman killed Maxwell Lord. Wonder Woman's part of the Justice League. Superheroes are dangerous. That's exactly the way the events played out. And that's the case that Earth 2 Wonder Woman is making. Be a hero. Be human. Understand, everyone makes mistakes. You've made mistakes. Batman makes mistakes. Superman makes mistakes. Learn from them and become a better person. And so because of this, we transition back over to Superman on Earth 2, and we end up having this really cool battle between himself and Superman on Earth 1. And that's kind of the funny thing here, because it's almost like experience versus experience. Which one comes out right here? But the funny thing about this is that it's actually Superman from Earth 1 that talks reason into Golden Age Superman. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that Golden Age Superman is fighting out of anger. He's fighting out of wrath. He's fighting out of rage. And the reason why is he says Lois Lane didn't die because it was unavoidable. Lois Lane died because she was exposed to the corruption that is what makes you superheroes who you are. She was exposed to the corruption of your evil deeds. She was exposed to the corruption of your moral ambiguity, your willingness to do things that would basically make you a villain as opposed to being a hero. Now, the funny thing about this is Wonder Woman steps in. Wonder Woman basically says, look, you guys have to stop. And this is when Golden Age Superman really lets him have it. He says, you're not heroes. Not in any sense of the word. You're anti-heroes. You're questionable heroes. Sometimes you do good things, but it doesn't atone for the bad things you do. And that's really what that's the funny thing about this, is a case could be made for that. Now, somebody in the comment section of the video about the OMAC project made a really good point where they were basically saying, look, if all the old stories were nothing but heroes doing the right thing all the time, that would get boring. Hence the reason why we started getting stories like The Dark Knight Returns and stuff like that, where we started seeing the darker side of heroes. But what Geoff Johns is saying is that is something that needs to be there. There needs to be a time when the morality of superheroes is questioned, when the morality of superheroes is ambiguous. That's something that needs to exist. The problem is when it becomes the status quo. That's the issue. Superheroes should always be something to look up to. They should always be something to aspire to. The humanity of heroes is what bridges the gap between them as, comic book characters and us as the reader, and it's what helps us identify with them. But what we don't want to read are stories where all we see is dark and drabby. What we don't want to see are stories where either it reflects the real world
Ooh, your promos. Good luck in your promos. Riot Games. Good luck. Hey, it's Riot Games here. You're in your Diamond 5 promos? Get ready for Nunu Top. Oh, you wanted to win? Of course you wanted to win. How about that Draven you just had on your team, except he hates you now, and he's gonna go 0-17. Drink water. True, true, true. Let me just... Whoa, water did the job. I've got so much energy. We're going to Challenger today.
Da mach dich auf, mein Jung, denn die Segel sind gehisst. Seit ich denken kann, willst du mit uns fahren, weit hinaus auf unserem Schiff. Du bist ein...
Ready, aim, fire.
This is so fucking funny. He fucking dashed into my plan. That was hilarious. Alright, home cats. Altsy. I'm so good at this video game.
This is bannable. Are you guys getting aroused?
An ally has been slain.
I'll do Dyrus first since it's really easy.
Hey guys, I am not gonna. If you listen, if you talk about League, fuck you. Fucking losers. Honestly, shut up.
I'd keep my head down if I were you.
So I use my ult backwards to get over the wall.
No way this is happening. Oh my god.
Itemless challenge, Twitch chat. Itemless challenge.
Subscribe to Hashinshin. 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 Subscribe to Hashinshin.
Let me jump! Oh, thank you. Come on, land that ulti. There we go. Chugging you baited.
Tyler! Holy sh...
Stupid bitch! Hey! Hey! You face Tobias! Tobias!
misclicked my E. Oh, I'm actually gonna die to this. Oh, never mind. Guess we kill both.
Later, bitch. Oh no! Oh, the stop! Oh!
Fucking kidding me, dude. He's just running and he comes in, he's like,
What? 1050? What the? 1050? Dude, 1050!
Oh, come on. Come on, guys. Come on, guys. Not this again.
Welcome to Summoner's Rift.
Ah, my god. Oh, is he gonna ult? Holy shit.
30 seconds until minions spawn.
Yeah! Run away, Taibo!
what? Song in replay.
Yep, you later, bitch. Suck mud. What the fuck? Are you fucking serious? What the fuck was that?
Oh, that's.
Got him, dog.
Heavy on your heart, heavy on your mind. Wandering the streets tonight. If you're looking for a home, you are not alone. I can be your guiding light. 'Cause I promise you, I'm a dreamer too. Heavy on my heart, wandering the streets tonight. When it all counts for something, sure. If we're caught in a wave, I will carry over. It don't matter where you are, I'll run to your front door. When my head goes in different directions, you know my heart's never on the move. And in the dark times, you don't have to question if I'm on where we are. You could put an ocean between our love, love, love. It won't keep us apart. You could build a wall, I will run it up, 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 just to get to your heart. If we're caught in a wave, maybe we'll make a way. You could put an ocean between our love, love, love. It won't keep us apart. Shadows play on, I don't aim. I lose myself, I do. But I find my way to velvet chains. I'll crash right into you. If we're caught in a wave, I will carry over. It don't matter where we are, you're still the one I choose. When my head goes in different directions, you know my heart's never on the move. And in the dark times, you don't have to question if I'm on where we are. You could put an ocean between our love, love, love. It won't keep us apart. You could build a wall, I will run it up, 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 just to get to your heart. If we're caught in a wave, maybe we'll make a way. You could put an ocean between our love, love, love. It won't keep us apart. You could put an ocean between our love, love, love. It won't keep us apart. You could build a wall, I will run it up, 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 just to get to your heart. If we're caught in a wave, maybe we'll make a way. You could put an ocean between our love, love, love. It won't keep us apart. Heavy on your heart, heavy on your mind. Wandering the streets tonight. If you're looking for a home, you are not alone. I can be your guiding light. 'Cause I promise you, I'm a dreamer too. Heavy on my heart, wandering the streets tonight. When it all counts for something, and your pocket's full of nothing, let's get high, believe it. I can promise you, yes, I am a dreamer too. We are dreamers together, always and forever. Let's get high.
Your team.
Heavy on your heart, heavy on your mind. Wandering the streets tonight. If you're looking for a home, you are not alone. I can be your guiding light. 'Cause I promise you, I'm a dreamer too. Heavy on my heart, wandering the streets tonight.
She said she too young, don't want no man. So she gon' call her friends, now that's a plan. I just ordered sushi from Japan. Now yo bitch wanna kick it, Jackie Chan.
Drop top, how we rollin' down on Collin South Beach. Yeah, look like Kelly rollin', this might be my destiny. She want me to eat it, I guess then it's on me. You know I got the sauce like a fucking recipe. She just wanna do it for the grand. She just want this money in my hand. I'ma give it to her when she dance, dance, dance. She gon' catch a Uber out the Calabasas.
She said she too young, don't want no man. So she gon' call her friends, now that's a plan. I just ordered sushi from Japan. Now yo bitch wanna kick it, Jackie Chan. She said she too young, don't want no man. So she gon' call her friends, now that's a plan. I just ordered sushi from Japan. Now yo bitch wanna kick it, Jackie Chan. question about me back. Just cause they heard what hood I'm from, they think I'm crazy. Okay, well maybe just a little crazy. Cause I admit I'm crazy about that lady, yeah. Finger to the world, let's fuck you, baby. I've been slaving, done the pussy cause I'm running out of patience. No more waiting, no, no. Bouncing like a yo-yo. Living life on fast forward, but we fucking slow-mo, yeah, yeah. She said she too young, don't want no man. So she gon' call her friends, now that's a plan. I just ordered sushi from Japan. Now yo bitch wanna kick it, Jackie Chan. She said she too young, don't want no man. So she gon' call her friends, now that's a plan. I just ordered sushi from Japan. Now yo bitch wanna kick it, Jackie Chan. Jackie Chan. I can't wait for the show. Got that good, yeah, I know. You should not be alone. All this drink got me gone. Car got me right, and I feel so alive. She don't wanna think, she don't wanna be no wife. She just wanna stay out late, she just wanna sniff the white. Can't tell her nothing, no, can't tell her nothing, no. She said she too young, don't want no man. So she gon' call her friends, now that's a plan. I just ordered sushi from Japan. Now yo bitch wanna kick it, Jackie Chan. Heavy on your heart, heavy on your mind. Wandering the streets tonight. If you're looking for a home, you are not alone. I could be your guiding light. 'Cause I promise you, I'm a dreamer too. Heavy on my heart, wandering the streets tonight. When it all counts for something.
this is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are finally here. We are finally here at Secret Wars issue number 1, the start of Secret Wars 2015. And I am so excited here. I am so psyched because Marvel has basically taken the axe to all but like 10 people from the Earth 616 universe. Everybody else is dead. It's insane what they've done here. So if you guys recall in our last video, what we had talked about was that with the incursion beginning to happen, with the incursion taking place between the Earth 616 universe and the Ultimate Universe, that if one of the planets wasn't destroyed, if one of the Earths wasn't destroyed, that both realities are going to be destroyed entirely. And so in response to this, Nick Fury from the Ultimate Universe launched an invasion against the Earth 616 universe in order to annihilate the superheroes and destroy that Earth so that both universes could continue to exist. And so this is where the story picks up. The story basically picks up here where the invasion is taking place. Now, in the midst of this invasion, we see a multitude of heroes. It's basically all hands on deck. The Guardians of the Galaxy are present. The X-Men are present. Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Danny Rand, Carol Danvers, Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four. All these different characters have all popped up from all over the planet Earth to try to stave off this invasion. But what's also taking place here is that Reed Richards and the Fantastic Four are trying to organize this multiversal life raft. Again, this is a life raft that's basically been designed to house a certain number of people, presumably around 60, that will allow all these individuals to survive the collapse of the multiverse should it take place, and then survive into the next, whatever the next multiverse happens to be. And so what we find here is that there eventually comes a point whereby it seems as though nothing can be done, that too much time has passed. It's impossible to destroy the Earth from the Ultimate Universe without destroying both Earths in the process, simply because of their proximity and the fact that if the Ultimate Universe version of the Earth, or if the main Earth was destroyed, it would simply just blow up both of them, just due to the fact that the explosion would be so extreme. And so what happens here is the Fantastic Four and Black Panther effectively use the multiversal life raft to begin reaching out to the various heroes that they need that will help them move on into the next multiverse. And so the following heroes are picked up. The following heroes continue to be part of what we'll see going into Battle World. We see Peter Quill joins this team along with the all new female version of Thor, followed by Peter Parker Spider-Man, Carol Danvers, and Cyclops, who has basically re-ingested or retaken back on the Phoenix Force. And this is it. This is all we get. Now, of course, this is in addition to the Fantastic Four and to Black Panther, but this is really all we see. These are the only characters. These about 9 or 10 people are the only ones from the main Earth 616 universe that are presumably going to live on into whatever this new battle world is going to be. And so what happens here is that while the group is trying to make their escape, trying to simply survive the collision of both of these Earths, that there's all kinds of electrical storms, there's all kinds of chaos due to the instability of these realities colliding with one another, and that during this time, the section which basically holds Susan Storm, Johnny Storm, Ben Grimm, and the Fantastic Four's children is ripped away. And so what happens is Reed Richards tries to launch this kind of rescue attempt in the sense that he tells T'Challa to lower the shields. Now, initially, T'Challa doesn't want to, and the reason being because if they did, it might cause some kind of instability within the ship, and it would end up destroying the multiversal life raft entirely. And so what he says is that he'll be able to lower it down for 5 seconds, but after that 5 seconds is up, if the integrity of the ship goes below 90%, then he's going to have to raise the shield regardless of what's happened. And so once the shield goes down, Reed Richards tries to reach out to Susan Storm and to grab that section of the ship, but right before he gets there, that section of the ship disintegrates entirely. And so basically, Reed Richards is the only member of the Fantastic Four left. Everybody else has been completely annihilated. And so what we find is that as everything seems to come to an end, as this entire multiverse begins to collapse and to basically be destroyed, that we see that this multiversal life raft seems to land on what this new battle world is. I guess on the formation of the conglomeration of all these different realities that have been merged on to what battle world is going to be. But again, this is all we get. We don't really know what's going to happen next. The only indication we have is from what Marvel has told us through various interviews and so on, that Secret Wars issue number 2 is going to cover all these different realities. But the fact remains, in terms of the Earth 616 portion of Battleworld, that is to say, the portion of Battleworld that's going to house the characters that were previously part of the Earth 616 continuity, these are the only ones we're going to see. That we're going to see Reed Richards, we're going to see Black Panther, we're going to see Carol Danvers, Cyclops with the Phoenix Force, Peter Parker Spider-Man, the all-new version of Thor, Peter Quill, and maybe one or two other people. But that's it. This is all we have left. So keeping with our series of videos on Secret Wars, we pick up now with Secret Wars number 2. And I want to tell you guys right now, this is a damn good story. So where Secret Wars number 1 concluded with the end of everything, the end of the Marvel multiverse, and the destruction of presumably a multitude of characters, Secret Wars number 2 picks up with the beginning of Battleworld, with the beginning of everything. Now, as we get into this video, what I want to make clear here is that some of the things that we're going to see in this video, we're simply just not going to have answers to yet. We don't know what a lot of these things will turn into. And so while I'm sure you guys will have a lot of questions, I'll answer them as best I can. But some of them we just don't have an answer to. What I also want you guys to keep in mind here is that the notion of alternate realities is no longer part of the equation. That there's no more Earth 616, there's no more Ultimate Universe, there's no more Marvel Zombies universe, none of that stuff. Instead, there's simply just Battleworld. And so over the course of this video, while I reference things like Earth 616 and while I reference things like the Ultimate Universe, that's simply just to give you guys perspective. That's to help you guys understand these characters in reference to who they used to be as opposed to who they are now. So what we do as we start this series is we pick up with some young man who has successfully lifted the hammer of Thor, which is basically our introduction to the Thor Corps. As is explained to us by Odin Thor, who appears to be basically the leader of the Thor Corps, the Thor Corps is essentially the police force of Battleworld, and they carry out the will of the god of Battleworld, or of this reality, who's actually revealed to us to be Dr. Doom. And what we also do is we join Odin Thor as he takes this newest recruit of the Thor Corps on a tour of Battleworld. What we're given is this sort of origin story where prior to the existence of Battleworld, there was nothing. And then everything came into existence, presumably at the hands of Dr. Doom. What this basically telling us here is that the Thor Corps are pretty much unaware of anything having ever existed before the end of the Marvel multiverse and the establishment of Battleworld. Now again, we don't know this for a fact, this just appears to be the case. More so than that, we don't know if anybody else on Battleworld believes this. At this moment, it's simply just given to us. This seems to be the perspective of the Thor Corps. But what we do is we find that in the Kingdom of Utopolis, we actually move away from the Thor Corps here, and we find that we pick up with the Captain Britain Corps. And the Captain Britain Corps under the Kingdom of Utopolis appear to have several scientists that have uncovered some kind of a vessel. And this vessel appears to be the raft that was used by Reed Richards and the various heroes from Earth 616 to escape the collapse of that universe, the destruction of everything, and survive into the, the creation of Battleworld and this new reality. Now from here, we rejoin, Odin Thor. We re-pick up with his character and this recruit as they arrive at Bar Sinister, which is the kingdom of Mr. Sinister. And again, as they basically exist to carry out the law of doom, this is what they're doing. What we're told is that Sinister has been ordered ordered to the presence to appear before Dr. Doom himself. And again, this really seems to give us some very, a large amount of insight into the role that Dr. Doom plays as the god of Battleworld, in the sense that it seems as though Dr. Doom is really believed to be this kind of god, because what happens here is Sinister makes no attempt to refuse the order to appear before Doom. In the Earth 616 continuity, Sinister was a character who really didn't take orders from anybody. He really just kind of did his own thing. But in this circumstance, when he's ordered to appear before Dr. Doom, while he is very cavalier about it, while he has a lot of attitude about it, he still does it. And so the second thing that we learn here is that it appears that Marvel's basically chosen some of the most prominent villains from the Earth 616 continuity to be the leaders of, to be the leader of these different kingdoms within Battleworld. Of course, Mr. Sinister, being one of the more prominent members of Earth 616, is the leader of Bar Sinister itself. And so again, what we find is that we basically pick up with the arrival of the Thor Corps at what's referred to as Doomstat, which is the home of Dr. Doom. And it appears as though this place is guarded by some form of Galactus. Now, this is a little bit different from the Galactus that we're used to, in the sense that this version of Galactus is on fire. He has a fiery head and so on and so forth. But again, this just appears to be some version of the Galactus character. And at some point along the line, we may get a little more information about this. But what we end up doing here is once we join Doom inside, or I guess join the Thor core and Sinister inside of Doomstat, Doctor Strange is revealed to us to be the Sheriff of Battleworld, who basically upholds the laws of Doom across all of the kingdoms. If for any reason a dispute arises between the rulers of these various kingdoms, the dispute itself is settled within the House of Doom in order to basically maintain peace and to keep kingdoms from waging war against each other and devolving Battleworld into a state of chaos. What we're told is that Sinister apparently has allied himself with Hyperion, the ruler of the kingdom of the Squadron Supreme, and that the intention of them seems to be to overthrow Jamie Braddock, who is the leader of Utopolis. Now, as a result, Jamie Braddock has basically requested a hearing in front of Dr. Doom to settle this matter, to settle this dispute. But the problem is that while Sinister basically lies to maintain his innocence, he's eventually found guilty by Doctor Strange. And so as a result, Sinister basically chooses to challenge Brian Braddock, the brother of Jamie Braddock, to a battle to the death. Now, while we're told that Sinister has the right to earn his innocence by battling someone to the death, we're not told why he's able to challenge Brian Braddock instead of the person who's accusing him, Jamie Braddock. But I'd go as far as to say here that most likely because Sinister is a representation of his own territory, or possibly because he's the one being challenged, he has the right to challenge anybody from the kingdom that's challenging him. And so in this instance, he chose to challenge Brian Braddock. But again, I don't really have any confirmation for this. I have no real basis for this. It's just kind of a theory on my part to sort of make this make sense in my own mind. But regardless, the result is that during the fight, Sinister appears to be victorious. But before he's able to deal the killing blow, he's basically stopped by Dr. Doom. And the reason for this is, I guess as Doom explains, because Doom's basically uncovered some knowledge which indicates that there are individuals who have been plotting against his position, and that these individuals may exist inside the kingdom of Utopolis. And so while Jamie Braddock claims a lack of knowledge, well, he says he doesn't really know anything about this, what Doom says is that if Jamie Braddock is the ruler of Utopolis, then as a king of that area, he should know everything that's going on within his kingdom. And that failure to achieve this, failure to do so, means that he's basically not fit to be the king. And so the result is that Doom, at the behest of Susan Storm, has Jamie Braddock taken away, Brian Braddock elevated to the position of the king of Utopolis, and Sinister sentenced to a series of lashes. Now, what I want to do here is I want to take a break from this entire segment for a second, and I want to talk about Susan Storm. And the reason why is because, as we know with Secret Wars #1, it appeared that all of the members of the Fantastic Four, with the exception of Reed Richards, had been killed when the universe collapsed, when their lifeboat had basically kind of broken away, and so on. But it appears that Dr. Doom has saved them. And so while we don't really know where Ben Grimm or where Johnny Storm is, what we do know is that Franklin Richards, Valeria Richards, and Susan Storm are alive. Now, we don't know if some of the other individuals that we've seen, for example, Mr. Sinister or some of those other characters, were saved by Dr. Doom. We simply just know that they're here. But regardless, what we do here is we pick up with the Thor Corps as they prepare to deliver Jimmy Braddock to his fate after Jimmy Braddock was basically sentenced by Dr. Doom. And what happens is the group arrives at the Shield Wall, which appears to be a giant wall stretching the entire length of Battleworld, which seems very similar to the Great Wall of China here. But what happens is Jamie Braddock, being sentenced, is basically thrown over the wall. And so what we learn is that on the other side of this wall, which is designed to isolate or to protect all the kingdoms of Battleworld, there consists 3 groups. The first group are the zombies from the Marvel Zombie universe. The second group is the Annihilation Wave and Annihilus himself. And the third group appears to be just a vast number of robots. Now, what Odin basically tells his recruit here is that it appears as though somewhere along the line that when this wall was built, that various people had been placed there to defend it, and they've been defending it for years, and that people had died. So again, it seems as though if Doom really did create Battleworld, if he really did create this reality, then perhaps he planted the thoughts in the minds of all its inhabitants that they've been here for as long as they can remember, or that for some reason this is really just kind of a temporal thing. Again, this is really kind of confusing here, and we don't really have an answer to this question, although I'm sure that as time progresses, we'll understand why it is that Odin Thor believes that he's been here for years, when in fact, this isn't the case. And the reason why this is not the case is because what happens is we jump back to the scientists from the kingdom of Utopolis who are investigating this raft that appeared to belong to the survivors of Earth 616. But what's revealed to us is that the Thor Corps, or at least a small contingent of the Thor Corps, had been assigned here to basically bring an end to this excavation, to take all the items that had been uncovered by the scientists and to take them back to Castle Doom. But what ends up happening is one of the scientists basically opens this raft, opens this ship, and when it does, it's revealed to us this is not the ship that belongs to Earth 616. Instead, it's the ship that belonged to the Ultimate Universe, Reed Richards, Thanos, and the Cabal. And so what happens is Thanos and the Cabal come out and immediately incapacitate this small contingent of the Thor Corps. We then see that Thanos is basically confused about where he's at. He doesn't understand where this world is, how this world got there, or how they even got there. And so what happens is Thanos basically questions the scientist, and the scientist says that while this place is referred to under a multitude of different names depending on who it is that you're talking to, if it's a highborn, it's referred to as one name. If it is a common person, they refer to it as Battle World. What this basically means here is that either a very long amount of time has passed between the collapse of the universe and the birth of this new universe, which would explain why Odin says, or why Odin Thor says, that they've been protecting it for years, or it could simply just be that almost no time has passed. This reality came into existence, and then now Thanos and these individuals are coming out of the raft. Again, this is a little confusing here, but again, as we continue with the Secret Wars story, this will all be made to make sense, so I have no doubt about that. So as we get into Secret Wars number 3, keep in mind that we're going to be running over these as they're released to us, and so we may find that there are relatively large gaps between each telling of this story. But what we're going to find in this portion of the story is we're going to receive a large bit of information regarding the origin of Battle World. Now, having said that, in Secret Wars number 2, if you recall, we were given this sort of tour of Battle World, in that we learned that the Thor Corps is composed of alternate versions of Thor and individuals from alternate realities that were deemed worthy of wielding Thor's hammer, and that the Thor Corps itself basically functions as the police force of this new Battle World. Now, what we also learned was that Dr. Doom had apparently constructed Battle World, although we weren't really told how this was done. But due to the vast power that he seems to possess, Doom operates as the ruler of Battle World as a god, with Doctor Strange, I guess, acting as the sheriff and second in command to Dr. Doom. What we also learned was that under Doom are a series of barons, with each ruling their own section of Battle World under their own authority, although there is some measure of what they can and can't do. Now, at the end of the last story, if you recall, we discovered that the life raft used by the Ultimate Universe to escape the collapse of the multiverse was discovered and accidentally opened, resulting in Thanos, Maximus the Mad, Namor the Submariner, and the rest of the Cabal basically escaping and getting out into Battle World proper. Now from here, we jump to Doctor Strange as he investigates the raft that Thanos and the Cabal emerged from. And after speaking with several members of the Thor Corps, Doctor Strange tells them to basically search out and to find the Cabal, but to bring them back alive. What we also find is that Doctor Strange realizes that not everyone who was on board the raft left with Thanos, revealing that Miles Morales had actually stowed away and didn't seem to be detected by the Cabal themselves. In addition to this, as Miles begins to explain how it was he came to be on the raft, Doctor Strange actually stops him once he realizes that Miles Morales remembers everything before and during the collapse of the multiverse. Now from here, we transition to Doctor Strange, the newest Thor recruit, and Miles Morales inside of what's referred to as the Hidden Isle of Agamotto, which is to say Doctor Strange's own territory that's hidden away from the eyes of everybody else, presumably with the exception of Doctor Doom. What we're told here is that Doctor Strange was actually able to preserve elements of the main Marvel Universe version of the planet Earth within his own sanctum sanctorum, but that he's also in possession of the raft that was used by the heroes of the main Marvel Universe to escape the collapse of the multiverse. And after Thor is able to actually open the raft at the request of Doctor Strange, the group is initially greeted by Peter Parker, Carol Danvers, Jane Foster, Thor, and Star-Lord. Now the initial response by both Doctor Strange and and the remnants of the Earth 616 superheroes is one of skepticism, in that they don't know if they can trust the others or not. But when the group is actually joined by Scott Summers as the Phoenix, Black Panther, and Reed Richards, Doctor Strange becomes convinced that these are indeed his friends. And so what we do is we get this sort of explanation from Doctor Strange with regards to how it was that Battleworld came into existence. What Doctor Strange tells them is that they've all been in stasis inside this raft for about 8 years or so, and that when the multiverse collapsed, Doom began reaching out to what was left of the multiverse and began rounding up various pieces of those Earths to form Battleworld. Now keep in mind, as Doctor Strange is giving this explanation, he's not actually referring to Doctor Doom, he's simply referring to this being as God. Now in addition to this, no one on Battleworld, with the exception of a handful of people, have any idea of what their past universe was like or that it even existed. As far as they're concerned, they basically just came into existence with Battleworld. And the reason why they believe this is because quite literally Doctor Doom had modified their memories. Now when Reed Richards asked the question who this god is, this is when Doctor Strange reveals that it's Victor Von Doom, that Doctor Doom had effectively saved all of their lives. Now from here we switch back to the Cabal as they continue to figure out this new world, and as the group basically kind of sits around and they kind of eat and they debate and so on, the consensus among those talking is that they should not have killed all the versions of Thor, and instead they should have basically questioned those members of the Thor Corps who were present. But the result is that Thanos responds by simply saying that they will have all the answers they seek shortly. And when the question's asked how it is that Thanos knows this, Thanos simply says that he's looking up. And so what this basically tells us is that the Thor Corps, as it was assigned by Doctor Strange to track down the Cabal, has successfully done so. And it seems as though the Thor Corps is basically descending on Thanos and his Cabal. And this is where the story ends. We're kind of left to find out what happens next in issue number 4. So what I want to do here is cover the 4th part of Marvel's Secret Wars. But because we've already done a video on why Secret Wars was launched in the first place, and because of the fact that we don't yet know what the fallout of the conclusion of this comic is going to be, what we're going to do here is we're just going to basically cover the story. And as the events unfold in future publications, we'll tie those in to give a more well-rounded understanding of what all's going on here. In Secret Wars number 3, we had discussed that following the collapse of the multiverse, Ultimate Universe Reed Richards, Thanos, Namor the Submariner, and the rest of the Cabal from the mainstream Marvel Universe had escaped the collapse using a raft from the Ultimate Universe itself. In addition to this, Peter Parker, Captain Marvel, Black Panther, Thor, Jane Foster, Star-Lord, Scott Summers as the Phoenix Force, and Reed Richards had all survived the collapse in a second raft from the mainstream Marvel Universe. And while 8 years had passed on the outside, only a few hours had passed inside the rafts. And so when Thanos' group emerged, and after being met with the arrival of a contingent of the Thor Corps, operating as the police of Battleworld, Thanos and the Cabal killed all of them and then left the area. Now where Secret Wars number 3 had ended on the arrival of the remaining Thor Corps after tracking down Thanos and his group following their massacre, the Secret Wars number 4 picks up with Doctor Strange providing a narrative relating to the formation of this new world. What Doctor Strange tells us is that following the multiversal collapse, Doom, Doctor Strange, and the Molecule Man Owen Reese had killed the Beyonders, the orchestrators of the great multiversal collapse. In taking their power, Doom reshaped reality and formed Battleworld in the process by taking what was left of alternate universes and placing them in a singular location, although we're not told exactly how it was he was able to accomplish all of this. While Doctor Strange serves Doom as his second in command, his stance on the function of Battleworld seems to be a disappointment in that his view of the world being a place of constant struggle and strife is a far cry from what it should have actually been. Now while the group debates the decision of Doctor Strange in turning away from omnipotence and allowing Doom to take the mantle instead, the hammer of one of the Thor Corps recruits lights up, indicating a request for aid from those battling Thanos. At this point, the story transitions to one of the Thor Corps members speaking directly with Doom, informing him that the battle with Thanos goes poorly. While the group may be successful, it would cost the lives of many of the Thor Corps members in order to defeat Thanos himself. In addition to this, when Valeria Richards is asked by Doom to use her vast intelligence to analyze the situation, Valeria states that the result of this battle is impossible to determine. The power wielded by Thanos from the mainstream Marvel Universe dwarfs any of his alternate reality counterparts that currently exist on Battleworld. While Doom states that such a conflict is below his concern, Susan Storm tells him that the power demonstrated by these individuals goes beyond everyone present on Battleworld save Doom himself and maybe Doctor Strange. While Doom debates whether to act or not, he witnesses the arrival of Doctor Strange on the battlefield alongside the heroes from the mainstream Marvel Universe and Miles Morales from the Ultimate Universe. However, with the arrival of Doctor Strange and his forces also comes the arrival of Reed Richards from the mainstream Marvel Universe, and after stating that he had spent years searching every corner of Battleworld for him, Doom states that he's finally managed to find him. Taking this time to act, Doom appears on the battlefield confronting all forces involved. While he explains to Reed that his new power makes him a virtual god, Thanos responds by simply stating that there exists a difference between playing God and truly being a god. In addition to this, Scott Summers attacks Dr. Doom, stating that Doom is like every man playing with a power that he doesn't understand. With the planet being composed of a multitude of realities, each one home to its own occupants, Doom has forced himself into the role of a leader with no true understanding of what it means to lead. Now, while Scott Summers is able to hold his own against Doom for a time, Doom's able to overpower Scott Summers and in the process seizes him by the neck and breaks it, killing him in the process. During the entire conflict between Doom and Scott Summers, however, Doctor Strange takes the opportunity to use his power and send the various heroes and villains away to various places in Battleworld, although we don't know how. Now, when asked by Doom as to why he had done this, Doctor Strange simply replies that Doom would have inevitably killed them all due to the fact that they would never have bent their knees to his power. And furthermore, Doctor Strange touches on the inherent fear of Doom in that after all the power that he's gained and his stance as a ruler of this new reality, that in the end, he still fears Reed Richards. And so in response to what seems to be the incorrigible nature or perhaps the insubordinate nature of Doctor Strange, Dr. Doom kills him entirely. So starting off with the funeral of Doctor Strange, there are a few key things here I would like you to pay special attention to. The first is the eulogy that's being given. The unnamed man of the Thor Corps tells us that in the beginning there was nothing, and that the great god Doom had created everything, and alongside him stood his first disciple in the form of Doctor Strange. If you notice, there is no mention of the Molecule Man, the third man who stood beside Doom and Strange in the battle against the Beyonders in order to save the multiverse. Now this is something I'd like you to keep in the back of your head because this will become particularly important as we continue with this part of the event. The next thing I'd like you to take notice of is Franklin Richards. When the funeral proceedings complete, Franklin Richards offers a gift to the statue of Doctor Strange in the form of a leaf that he turns into a wreath. Now again, this is also important because Jonathan Hickman is telling us that Franklin Richards still has the power to warp reality. Furthermore, because Jonathan Hickman's stories all tie into each other, with the events of Franklin Richards making Galactus' herald during the Future Foundation in the mainstream continuity, it's entirely possible that this version of Franklin Richards does possess the same power. Now, whether this power rivals that of Dr. Doom is unknown, but what Franklin tells us is that he plans revenge against whoever it was that killed Doctor Strange, indicating that a battle will take place somewhere along the line between Franklin Richards and Dr. Doom. Now the story begins to transition away a bit and focus on Valeria Richards. As a daughter of Susan and Reed, Valeria was a character that had a level of intelligence comparable to both her father and Dr. Doom. As such, while she expresses feelings to Doom that her actions of having previously notified Doctor Strange about the survivors of the Ultimate Universe led him down the path that resulted in his death, she remains unaware that it was actually Doom who killed Strange. But furthermore, in her mind and the mind of everyone else, it is believed that the survivors of the mainstream and the Ultimate Universe continuities were actually the ones who had killed Strange. And so the question lingers that if Doom himself had arrived to fight alongside Doctor Strange, how was it that the survivors got away? While Doom seems to beat around the bush here in stating that no one had escaped, the explanation he offers on why they've not been captured is that in his current mindset, if he were to seek them out, he would immediately destroy them in his own grief. Now, while this is clearly a lie, Jonathan Hickman leaves this a little ambiguous as to whether or not Valeria believes it. And so in an effort to distract her thoughts from Doom's involvement, or for some reason or another, Doom tasks Valeria Richards with tracking down the survivors of the mainstream and the Ultimate Universe continuities. Now continuing on, Jonathan Hickman continues this trend of revealing important aspects of the events following the collapse of the multiverse when we learn that the Molecule Man Owen Reese is actually still alive. Now this is perhaps the most important aspect of the story because this gives us some insight into how Battleworld formed, how it functioned prior to the death of Stephen Strange, and how his death will change everything going forward. Now I'd like you to pay special attention to the words Hickman uses here: devourer, hunger, and so on. While this could simply mean that Owen Reese is quite literally hungry for physical food, the running theory among fans is that Molecule Man is set to be the new Galactus. Again, while this is a theory, it seems supported in the information that follows. But what Hickman does here is seemingly retcon the creation of everything. Where previously it was believed that the Enigma known as the One Above All was the driving force behind everything in existence, what Hickman seems to be telling us here is that the Beyonders themselves had created all things, including the multiverse. In addition to this, Hickman provides a bit of consolidation regarding the events that led up to the multiversal collapse. With the Beyonders having looked at their multiverse and making the decision to basically start over, the Molecule Man was created and then split into an infinite number of versions of himself, which were all placed in every reality across the infinite expanse of the multiverse. Using his ability to control the molecules of all things, the Beyonders sought to destroy every version of Molecule Man simultaneously, which would bring an end to everything and allow the Beyonders to basically start anew. However, learning of their plan, Doom and Owen Reese concocted their own plan to destroy each version of Owen Reese in order to preserve the multiverse. But a byproduct of this action was that with each version of Molecule Man that was killed in an alternate reality, the mainstream Molecule Man grew more and more insane since he was effectively losing more and more of himself. And so with time running short, Doom, Strange, and Owen Reese abandoned their plan and instead began collecting Molecule Men from the realities that hadn't been destroyed. Now during their final battle with the Beyonders, the captured versions of Molecule Men were dispersed into the Beyonders and detonated like bombs. And so with the Beyonders dead but their powers still present, Doom, Strange, and the last remaining Owen Reese captured their power, seeking to use it in order to preserve what was left. Using fragments of the world that he had traveled during his time killing the Molecule Men, Doom pieced these fragments together and formed Battleworld. In addition to this, the power of the Beyonders was simply too much for Doom or Doctor Strange to control, and so using Owen Reese as a conduit, the power of the Beyonders is channeled through the Molecule Man and possessed by Doom. However, what Hickman tells us is that where Dr. Doom acted as the power of Battleworld, he was not all-knowing and relied on Doctor Strange to operate as an eyes and ears. But because Doctor Strange is now dead, Doom is virtually blind to all things going on in Battleworld, which has effectively started a chain reaction that will eventually lead to its total destruction. Now transitioning back to Valeria Richards, we joined with the Future Foundation. As a group that was established in Hickman's run of the Fantastic Four, the Future Foundation operated as a group of the world's brightest minds, both young and old, in order to solve the world's problems. While the group as it exists now is composed of a fraction of its original population, under Valeria Richards, they established a couple of important things for us. The first is that everything on Battleworld is composed of what they refer to as God Particles, or the power of Doom. While we know this to be the power of the Beyonders, the Future Foundation doesn't, and so they simply state that everything on Battleworld is composed of this energy. Now while this might be a bit of a stretch here, I would be willing to go out on a limb and say that Hickman's telling us that rather than Doom piecing Battleworld together from what was left of the multiverse, instead, all of the realities that exist on Battleworld were created by Doom using the power of the Beyonders. But furthermore, as it's stated here, where Dr. Doom's power was rooted in the Beyonders, the power of Stephen Strange was rooted in magic. As a result, when Stephen Strange risked the survivors of the mainstream and Ultimate Universe continuities away and was subsequently killed by Doom, the machines of the Future Foundation registered 2 spikes of energy, one by Doom and one by Doctor Strange. Using the timeline of when these energies spiked, the group seems to come to the realization that Doom killed Strange. But as Valeria states, all information gathered on the investigation will stay with the group. And so as we bring this issue of Secret Wars to a close, we find Thanos facing the shield which separates the rest of Battleworld from the Marvel Zombies and Ultron, indicating that Thanos intends to use these forces for his own ends. So getting into Secret Wars Part 6, in truth, this comic is actually a little light on content in comparison to what we've seen so far. Where issue number 4 saw the death of Stephen Strange and the dispersing of the various survivors from the Earth 616 and Ultimate Universe continuities, issue number 6 continues the trend of their investigations into what took place between the collapse of the multiverse and the formation of Battleworld under Dr. Doom. Picking up 3 weeks after issue number 5, which concluded with Thanos standing at the wall separating Battleworld from the Marvel Zombies and Ultron army, Issue number 6 opens up with Dr. Doom and Valeria Richards examining the bodies of Corvus Glaive and Proxima Midnight. Conveniently, what Hickman does here is give us a bit of information regarding who these two are by way of Black Swan. To provide a little context for the new people, when Dr. Doom had begun the process of attempting to defeat the Beyonders' efforts to destroy the multiverse, he had amassed an army to help with a task which were called the Black Swans. As the sole survivor of the group, this woman took the name Black Swan as a singular identity and along with a handful of others, survived the collapse of the multiverse. Transitioning back to the story, we learn that over the course of the last 3 weeks, various territories within Battleworld have begun to rise up against Doom, and while none of them possess the power to destroy him outright, their efforts have been driven towards gaining the power necessary to do so. Furthermore, despite having been tasked with finding the surviving superheroes from before the collapse of the multiverse, Valeria Richards have been unable to achieve this task, but as we discovered in issue number 5, she along with several others have been working against Dr. Doom to end his rule, indicating that she's most likely lying here. This sentiment is actually compounded on when the story transitions to the Foundation. As a group that appeared during Hickman's run of the Fantastic Four and was actually referred to as the Future Foundation, the purpose of the Future Foundation was to bring the world's top minds together in an effort to develop various technologies to ensure a brighter future for the world. However, when the collapse of the multiverse happened, the individuals that we see here were the only members of the Foundation that seem to have survived. Furthermore, because Valeria has a level of intelligence on par with both Reed and Doom, while she had not figured out everything that was going on, at the very least, she speculated that Doom had killed Doctor Strange rather than the survivors of Earth 616 and the Ultimate Universe continuities. As a result, she and the rest of the Foundation began to focus their efforts on discovering the source of Doom's power, as well as putting the pieces together regarding the battle that took place, resulting in the death of Cyclops as the Phoenix, the vanishing of the survivors, and the death of Doctor Strange. Picking up with both versions of Reed Richards from the Earth 616 continuity and the Ultimate Universe, the conversation between the two serves to establish the dichotomy of their outlooks on life and their moral views. For 616 Reed, the defeat of Doom would likely result in his death, which draws a series of questions regarding what would happen next. However, for the Ultimate Reed, the only issue at hand is the destruction of Doom, with everything else existing as a secondary. Now this as a whole isn't wildly important, and all it really does is provide us with their differing perspectives, but also sets up Ultimate Reed to continue his role as the villain the Maker, going into all new, all different Marvel. Furthermore, the discussion between the two reveals that the insurgency within Battleworld is not a disorganized revolt among the various territories. Instead, someone referred to as the Prophet is leading these territories to freedom by helping them to revolt and then defeating the members of the Thor Corps when they arrive to restore order. In addition to this, we learn that 616 Reed is aware that his wife Susan, his daughter Valeria, and his son Franklin serve at the pleasure of Doom, and while their memories appear to have been altered in a manner that keeps them from recalling their lives before Battleworld, on a personal level, 616 Reed recognizes that unless Doom is defeated, he will effectively have lost his family. Transitioning to Castle Doom proper, what we find is that Peter Parker and Miles Morales have been tasked with locating the source of Doom's power, presumably by Reed Richards. However, as the two investigate the means by which Doom accesses his power, the two are joined by Valeria Richards, who reveals the access point. In addition to this, the modification of her memories by Doom are confirmed when Peter recognizes who she is, but she does not recognize him and doesn't know anyone by the name of Reed Richards. And so as the three begin to talk, Valeria admits that she was willing to help Miles and Peter access the source, so long as they answer the question of who it was that actually killed Doctor Strange during the battle. Confirming her belief that it was indeed Dr. Doom, Valeria lives up to her end of the bargain and provides the two with the passage they seek. Descending into the white-hot room, the two come face to face with Owen Reese. Providing him with a hamburger that's been in the pocket of Miles Morales for several weeks, Hickman toys with us a little bit by hinting at the idea that even if Reese isn't Galactus per se, at the very least, the hunger he suffers from is akin to Galactus and that he consumed everything that existed within the white space. Now what the contents of this area was is unknown and Hickman never actually tells us, but when Peter and Miles ask Owen about the source of Doom's power, Reese responds that he himself serves this purpose. Now again, this is really Hickman just leaving things ambiguous and will most likely be revealed at the end of the story. But for the sake of having a little fun, I would hazard a guess that when Doctor Strange, Owen Reese, and Dr. Doom stood against the Beyonders at the end of everything, because Reese had the power to manipulate the molecules of all things in existence, he most likely defeated the Beyonders, absorbed their power, and now exists as a way for Doom to control Battleworld. And so picking up at the Isle of Agamotto, which serves as Doctor Strange's home, the story begins to get a little more interesting when we join Black Panther and Namor the Submariner. After entering, the two are met with a magical vision of Doctor Strange. Allowing them to continue once they've proven their identities by providing a password, Doctor Strange goes on to tell them that if they're seeing this message, it's due to the fact that he's died. As such, he left his personal artifacts to only his most trusted friends. The first object is the Siege Courageous. Unlike the Siege Perilous, which allows an individual to step through and have their entire life reset while being transported to another location, the Siege Courageous allows transport in the same fashion without the loss of one's memories. The second object, however, is far more powerful and comes in the form of the Infinity Gauntlet. As he explains, because Battleworld is a singular reality composed of multiple other realities, the Infinity Stones were pulled from these various territories to form the Gauntlet, which will work if it's used. Now, picking up with Susan Storm and Franklin, her recollection of the events during the early days of Battleworld come in the form of a bedtime story, but also give us one interpretation of what has happened. Beginning with the formation of the Fantastic Four, the events that took place leading to the development of their powers remains the same, except that instead of Reed Richards leading the group, instead, as far as Susan is concerned, it was led by her father, Franklin Storm. Now, her recollection of these events is most likely due to Dr. Doom modifying her memories to ensure that her recollection of Reed does not interfere with her perspective of the world as Doom had created it. But as the story goes, the Fantastic Four existed on Earth and fought villains. However, when the multiverse collapse took place and Battleworld came into existence, the environment was harsh and only the strongest were able to survive amidst the chaos. During this time, Franklin Storm had been killed, and during the pandemonium, Doom had appeared under the desire to bring order to the chaos. However, before we find out anything else, Susan ends the story and sends Franklin off to bed. And so, picking up with Thanos, the insurgency within Battleworld and the various individuals within continues as we find him speaking directly with Ben Grimm. During the conversation, Grimm reveals that when Battleworld had taken form, an order